Good morning. So this is actually a video to describe some things that I'm learning in a book, but I thought I'd get my guitar because that's kind of what I do a lot of the time if I'm using theories and stuff. And I'm usually playing guitar while I'm doing these things, but Alright, so what I was learning was about formulation in cognitive behavioral therapy. So how we conceptualize the problem, answering the questions of what is happening, like describing the symptoms, answering the questions, why is it happening, and answering the questions, why is it continuing to happen? Because sometimes things can happen to us and it might be confusing, but then the problem seems to go away. So understanding the continuing of the problem is important too. So what I was learning, there was a section in the book on science. Is formulation a science or is it an art? And the basic things that it was talking about were the questions. I've been finding that formulating my memory by asking myself questions and remembering things through questions is very helpful. So there was the question of whether formulation should be looked at as a purely scientific way, where the formulation is based on is very protocol driven. So if you come in with generalized anxiety disorder, they flip through the shelf of interventions that's used for generalized anxiety disorder, and then they administer the treatment protocol. Or should it be based on individualized formulation because every person is unique? And so they were asking and describing formulation being somewhere in the middle of having these treatment protocols or theory and practice. And so one of the things they mentioned, there are some controversial things, one of them being that it would feel right if individual formulation, as in an individual comes in and you conduct your formulation purely on what the individual is bringing into the session and what the individual is expressing to you. It would seem that would be superior because every individual is unique, different things. But I think, there was one controversy where there was a study where behavioral therapy, they tested whether the outcomes of behavioral therapy based on an individual formulation was better or worse. And the outcomes actually sometimes were worse than just a general protocol-based formulation. And then they also mentioned that there was a cognitive behavioral therapy was superior in individual formulation for specifically bulimia nervosa. Which is interesting because the second example kind of mixes and matches a bit of general protocols and individual protocols. It's like, well, individual protocols specifically works in the CBT model, specifically works for bulimia nervosa. So that's the intervention that you use. I don't know, there's kind of some paradoxical things going on there, subtle, but so it mentioned the end result was that you should formulate conduct your formulation based on an individual's idiosyncratic, their expression of themselves, the individual themselves, and then continue to see if there are general protocols that fit the description of what they're giving you. And I think the general consensus is that you'll likely find a protocol that fits with them, and then be able to match that to their specific situation or experience. And if not, then you can conduct a formulation based on their individual manifestation of their anxiety, manifestation of their symptoms. So that was the general sense. There were some things, they didn't go into the deep controversies and details, but and the sort of things that still need to be hashed out within the mental health field, but there were a few different aspects of it. But I just wanted to, what it kind of made me think of, because the title was Formulation, Art or Science, or maybe it was Science or Art, and then they used that example again in the text, but then suggested science or art, and then in brackets they said, or at least craft, replacing art. So it seems like they didn't have their mind set up about this particular analogy, and I thought the particular a specific analogy that I've heard before is a lot easier to understand and to grasp, and that's engineering, sort of like human engineering. So an engineer has a whole bunch of theory, and then they tailor that theory to unique situations. And I think there's a lot of engineers that get stuck within a job, and then it does become just a regular, habitual thing. But, engineers, it's often the trait that an engineer can figure problems out in the world, like in the physical, objective world, using their knowledge. And I think that's a good way of comparing psychological engineering or mental health field. It's like you're given an individual with a problem, and it's your job to help them figure it out and how to resolve it. So you have all this theory, and then that theory comes into practice, and you use the theory to help the person help themselves, essentially. And to compare it to engineering, obviously, you get some controversy about excluding the human aspect of it. But, you can say that if you want. But I'm just using it as an example, so you don't have to get all worried about it. Yeah. I think it's a good example to use, and you don't have to, by using it in that way, it doesn't mean that you exclude the fact that they're a unique person with human value and innate value. Yeah. So that's what I've been learning. I think the basic fundamental of art versus science is whether it's general protocol therapy, general protocol formulation, or whether it's individual formulation. And the solution posed by the book was to start with an individual formulation and to see if there are general protocols that help with that. And I like the kind of engineering style that inspired me by the book. I'm going to finish with a little bit of guitar. All right.